3, 2, 1.
All right, thanks for joining us for a Baylor SportsCare Google Plus Hangout. We're always encouraging people to be active and stay engaged in sports and physical activity, but it's Texas, and heat is always an issue, either affecting performance and potentially can be dangerous. We've even seen a few international high-profile things lately. LeBron James missed the final 5 minutes of the NBA Finals with cramps due to the heat, which was a big story. And the World Cup, we're seeing them take designated hydration breaks because of the heat down in Brazil. So we know it's an issue. We've got some folks here that are going to help us explain how to best deal with it. We've got 3 of our licensed athletic trainers from Baylor SportsCare: Scott Fletcher, Jackie Porto, and Darren Kinney. Going to guide us a little bit, give us some advice. So, Jackie, why don't you start with just helping us with one of the key components in hydration. In a normal day, what should we be doing on a daily basis just to stay hydrated?
Well, there are many different calculations and estimates of how much water a person should be drinking on a daily basis. A lot of factors play into this. Basically, your age, your weight, and your activity level kind of vary how much each person should be drinking, but typically on a normal daily basis, for the average healthy male, you should be drinking around 3 liters of water, which is equivalent to 13 cups. And for the average healthy female, it's right around 2.2 liters of water, so right around 9 cups of water. The 9 to 13 cups of water you don't want to be drinking in one sitting, and I actually don't think you could drink it in one sitting. You want to space it out throughout the day. A good way to ensure that you're consuming the proper amount of water throughout the entire day is try to drink a glass of water with every meal you have, and try to drink a glass of water in between every meal throughout the day. A good fluid for hydration is the #1, water. You can supplement your water intake with sports drinks if you're physically active. And you also get fluid intake through your everyday nutrition. Specifically, when you eat fruits and vegetables, you're still getting your water intake here and there. Soft drinks, energy drinks, especially any type of carbonated beverage, you really want to steer away from and avoid, not only due to their large amounts of sugar in the beverages, but also the fact that most of them do contain caffeine, which is a diuretic that increases the amount of time, or the frequency of urination, so that only aids and assists in dehydration of the body. The best way of knowing you're properly hydrated is really just the color of your urine. So if it is a clear, pale yellow, that's a good sign. If it's a darker color, or if it's got a strong scent, then that's a good sign that you really want to start drinking some more water. A second sign basically is if you notice that you're constantly thirsty. Thirst is basically telling you that your body is already dehydrated, so you want to rarely feel that thirst signal.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jackie. Darren, what about, let's see, we're doing those things that Jackie talked about, but you're an athlete and you've got an event coming up. You know next week you've got a long run or a hard workout or something like that. What about pre-event type hydration? Are there extra things we should be doing before we compete?
Yeah, just kind of building on what Jackie had said earlier, it's just really important to keep your, properly hydrated throughout 24 to 48 hours before going into an event. It's always important to be well hydrated just for general performance guidelines. As she was saying, it's probably a good idea and a good ratio to do about 0.5 ounces of water per body weight or per pound of body weight. That just ensures that you're being properly hydrated and you're going to be able to get the best performance in your training, match, or practice, or game, or whatever you're going to be doing. One other tip is to not, again, just what Jackie said, not to ingest all that water at one setting, because just as we all said, you can't do that at one time. It's better to ingest small quantities of fluid at regular intervals throughout the day, rather than drinking that high amount of volume at one time, just to avoid the sluggish and sloshy feeling that you would get, and possibly cramping during that event as well. So up to that, cold water is usually always the best for doing activities less than 60 minutes. Anything over 60 minutes, you want to go ahead and add an electrolyte and carb-rich sports drink. Not only is that going to benefit your performance, but it's actually very much so needed. The best ones are ones that have about 15 to 18 grams of carbs per that 8 fluid ounces. And it's a kind of a general guideline. I mean, it's kind of plus minus depending on the size of the person or the individual or the type of activity that they're going to be going into. But about 2 hours prior to the event, you want to make sure that you're drinking about 16 ounces of water or 2 8-ounce cups. And again, we want to emphasize water because you're not getting to the point where you're already sweating and losing electrolytes and carbs. So water is usually the best thing. A lot of the common misconception is to go ahead and start with a carb and electrolyte-rich sports drink. But just doing cold water or any type of water is going to be your better option. And then about 30 minutes prior to activity to, again, avoid that sluggish feeling. And you want to do another 16 or so. I've read some studies where it says 5 to 10 ounces, but a general rule of thumb is about 16 ounces, again, of water about 30 minutes prior to activity. That'll usually help with the best kind of performance.
Great. And then once we get going, Scott, how do we hydrate during our event and then post-event to recover quicker?
Okay. Again, we like to push water over a lot of the other things. One of the worst things you can do, and something unfortunately we see at on a lot of benches, is when someone pulls out an energy drink. That again, as Jackie was saying, will be a diuretic and cause you to dehydrate instead of to hydrate. During an event, if depending on the longevity, you can introduce your sports drinks, so you get the electrolytes and all the body chemicals that you need for your activity. I like to have people water down those sports drinks so that they're getting less sugar and more of the actual water, and it makes it easier for the body to digest that as well. So the pediatric electrolytes are another great addition. You get all the electrolytes, and yet it's easy to digest, and it's lower in sugar intake. So again, absorption into the body. As a general rule, we like to encourage a person for every 15 minutes of vigorous activity that they need to consume 1 8-ounce cup of water. So if they're in a basketball game, a lot of times between timeouts, you want to encourage them to drink a whole cup of water, not just one little sip, which you'll see a lot of your high school and lower level kiddos just take a sip of water. You need to encourage them to drink more. So again, after the activity, we want to encourage them to rehydrate using electrolytes and water, and stay away from the energy drinks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scott. So obviously we need to stay hydrated. We know that. But then let's get to the big topic of the heat. We know we're all gonna have to, can't avoid it here, like I said, in Texas. So first, let's talk about just, Jackie, help us with general tips when how do we avoid it the best we can? What can we do to be more comfortable and perform better?
Well, hydration is the key factor in preventing heat illnesses. However, there are many other precautions you can take to assist in that prevention. So one of the simplest ways is application and reapplication of sunscreen throughout any exposure time in the sun. You also want to wear proper clothing, so nothing heavy or bulky that's impeding your sweat from evaporating off of your body. You want to stick to properly fitted athletic gear, basically. So materials that wick away the sweat from the skin, such as your dry fit materials, those are typically what you want to wear during those conditions. We all know the hottest time of the day is between noon and 4, so taking that into consideration. will also help prevent, if you can avoid those times of day or alter your practices or activity time. Maybe find a shaded spot is a good option as well. And having scheduled water breaks throughout activity is very important. You want to at least take a break at least every 20 to 30 minutes of activity to make sure you're staying properly hydrated throughout the activity. Also, having a bucket of ice water with some towels in it is a great thing. Have that over by your water station so when the kids take the breaks, they can put a cool water towel around their neck, help lower their body temperature. And for athletes or individuals participating in long periods of strenuous activity, heat acclimatization is critical in avoiding those heat illnesses. It helps your body adjust to the environment and increases your performance in such conditions. That typically is the first 2 weeks of being introduced to a new activity or being introduced to a new climate. You basically have a period of about 7 to 10 days where you are gradually acclimating to your climate. So basically it starts with restrictions on equipment you're wearing, and eventually you'll be full equipment by the end of that 2 weeks.
Okay, so we want to watch the time of day, wear proper clothing, sunscreen, take into account that we need to acclimate, so build in, don't run out the first day and run that marathon, or have a full-on pads practice, take breaks and find some shade. Those are all good tips. Thanks, Jackie. Scott, is there a definition of too hot? I know there are some organizations have rules and things that we don't practice in certain situations. How can you determine that, or is there a way?
Well, what you want to take into account is both the heat, so the temperature, ambient temperature outside, as well as the humidity. You can't just take one into account. That's where a lot of people make mistakes, is they think it's 85 degrees outside, and so they don't have to worry about heat problems. And the humidity may be at 70 or 80%, and so they're at more danger than someone that's in a dry humidity state at 100 degrees. So those two things come together. There's charts out there that if you follow your group's protocol, they will have access to charts where they have the temperature on one side of the XY chart and the humidity on the other, and so you can take the temperature and the humidity to figure out what the relative humidity is, and you can see if you're in a caution area, a danger area, or a high danger area, so that you can avoid certain situations. If in the event that you get in those situations, that's when all of these other preventative things that Jackie was just talking about go into effect. So you want to make sure you do the clothing. You want to make sure you don't work out as long a period of time. You want more water breaks, those type things. So heat plus humidity will give you your answer. Don't take either one just by themselves.
Okay. So let's really look at that heat index, and we all know that more and more we spend time in the air conditioning, whether it's kids in video games or all of us in an office or an air-conditioned car. So regardless of these precautions, we also want to know we're going to be in environments, if we're working out, if we're exercising, if our kids are playing, that they could be in some danger with some heat-related problems. So let's talk about signs and symptoms and things we should be looking at in different levels of issues from mild to severe. Darren, take us through some of the initial signs of maybe mild heat-related problems, things we should be aware of to start looking at either in ourselves or, again, our kids or athletes that we're coaching.
Well, as far as mild considerations, there's really no such thing as a mild consideration when you're dealing with a heat illness, but at the same time there are, less important, less medically, emergent situations or occurrences that can go on. The first thing to do when when talking about any kind of heat illness is to identify those types of susceptible individuals that that are more prone and likely to get a heat illness. Athletes with larger muscle mass are typically the ones that you're going to see with some of the more severe to moderate types of heat illness. You're also going to see those guys cramping a lot more because they are full of solid muscle, kind of like how Josie Altidore did, and that probably went into more of a strained hamstring as well. But he was probably feeling symptoms of heat cramping before any of that. Some other individuals that you want to kind of keep a lookout on are some of the overweight individuals. They tend to have about as much of an 18% greater heat production, which means they're going to evaporate and send off and radiate more than 18% more than a normal sized individual would. The youth are a lot more prone to having heat exhaustion and heat illnesses. Poor fitness level individuals and people who have had a heat illness of some sort, they've had that before. That means they're more likely to sustain a heat illness again in the future. So it's kind of as a mild thing. The very easiest one is to identify as a heat rash. That's typically just a rash that kind of occurs on the skin. It's kind of red and bumpy, has a prickly sensation or kind of tingling, and it's mainly just because of excessive sweat that accumulates on the body that doesn't evaporate. So where Jackie and Scott both mentioned, it's kind of important to wear proper clothing that's going to help with sweat wicking. That's one of the big terms with clothes nowadays, where you have that certain type of blend in the material that's going to help wick and move some of that sweat away from your body instead of having to create that heat rash and that prickly tingling type of sensation. But that's very, very mild, and on the scale of any of these heat illnesses, that would probably be the one of least concern. The next one is what we kind of call heat syncope, or it's really associated with just fainting or collapsing. It's usually due to prolonged periods of time of exertion, and the blood vessels in the legs tend to what we call vasodilation. Vasodilation, where the blood is going to start pooling in those extremities, and less oxygenated blood is going to reach to the brain, to the heart, thus causing a dizzy, nausea, and then eventual like a fainting or falling out type of thing. These are not really considered medical emergencies. The biggest thing at that time is to get the athlete laying down, raising their legs up above their heart to promote the blood flow back to the heart and the brain, to push the fluids, to keep them in a shaded area, and just to identify those symptoms that are going on. If they're not getting any better, then that could be a sign of some other heat illnesses coming in. They're a little bit more of a medical emergency, so monitoring those signs and symptoms. And then the last one on a minor scale, I mentioned it earlier, are called exertional heat cramps. Again, we talked about those type of individuals that are more prone to that. Those are the more muscular and more solid of an athlete. It's usually an extremely painful muscle cramping or spasm that occurs. You're going to typically see them in the extremities, more than likely the calves or hamstrings and thighs. During this time, it's really important to get the athlete to relax and to rest. While it's going to be a little painful, to encourage resting and relaxing, to stretch those things out, a little bit of a massage or those little rollers that you can use, like a foam roller, to kind of help get some of that cramping or spasm out. Hydration is very, very important at that time. You can see heat cramps go from very mild and immediately go away to having what we call full body heat cramps or falling out, to where the entire body is going into a cramp. And that is a situation where you would want to take to an emergency room, because IV fluids are extremely needed at that time to get that athlete hydrated again and to allow the muscles to release from that cramp or spasm.
Thanks, Darren. Jackie, we hear about heat exhaustion too. Can you tell us maybe a next level of symptoms that would indicate heat exhaustion?
Sure. Heat exhaustion is basically when you become dehydrated to a point that you're unable to sustain that adequate circulation. You can no longer continue that intense exercise. This is a medical emergency because it can quickly turn to heat stroke if it's not properly managed, so you want to act very quickly. Often the signs and symptoms of heat exhaustion occur suddenly out of nowhere and very rapidly. You do experience some of the things you'll experience dehydration and side effects. So the heat cramps that Darren was just talking about, they may be a little bit more severe and longer lasting. A couple signs and symptoms that you really look for in heat exhaustion will be heavy, excessive sweating, cool, moist, pale skin, and also they'll have a very fast heartbeat, but it'll be pretty weak. So when you feel their pulse, it'll be very faint to even feel. They may present with a low-grade fever, although that is more stepping into the heat stroke. And like I said, they'll have the dehydration symptoms, so the dark-colored urine, headache, and fatigue. So what you basically want to do in this situation is immediate rehydration. You want to get water and sports drinks into that person if they're able to take by mouth. So if they're nauseated or vomiting, you probably don't want to try to feed them by the mouth. That's going to need the IV fluid replacement. So the other thing is aggressive cooling. So you want to take them immediately to a shaded area. Like Darren said, elevate the feet, cool them down, so sponging them with water or taking those cold water ice towels and sponging them down with that. Ice packs, the best place to place them are at the neck, the armpits, and then the groin, so that's going to cool the body down a little bit faster.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. So obviously that's getting serious, and then you mentioned heat stroke. We've certainly heard of that and heard of some tragic instances that can occur with heat stroke when it gets really dangerous. Scott, give us those signs when we're talking about real emergency situations with potential heat stroke.
Okay. With heat stroke, again, that's a life-threatening situation. You want to, if you identify any of these symptoms, you want to immediately call 911 and get the emergency department involved in this quickly. This is a life-threatening situation. For the most part, the person will become red, hot, dry. They'll be dizzy, confused. They may stumble around with loss of balance, extremely irritable, vomiting. They can actually experience chills, so they may have a hard time believing it's heat-related when they have the chills. Headaches, loss of consciousness is very common. And all of these things can be avoided simply by watching the symptoms earlier that Darren was talking about and that Jackie was talking about. So that can be why heat stroke is such a frustration, is that it's something totally avoidable if you're aware of all of those things. The number one type of first aid that needs to be done for this person while EMS is on their way is to cool the body down rapidly. If you have access to a slush tub, which most of your organized high school sports have those, especially in August in Texas, you'll submerge them in that. You can also use the cool towels. Again, like Jackie was saying, you want to use it primarily around the neck, the armpits, and the groin area, so that you're cooling the major arteries, so that the cooling of the blood gets circulated quicker and more efficiently. Remove equipment, clothing, get them to shade, and use a fan. But again, the most important type of first aid while you're waiting for EMS to arrive is to cool the body. If they're alert enough that you can get them fluids, that's certainly a secondary thing you can do. Again, water, not anything with caffeine in it. But again, cool the body down is a lot more important than getting them the water, because they're going to get those IVs as soon as the EMS gets there.
Great information from all you guys. Thank you very much. We know we're not going to be able to totally avoid the heat, and we want people to stay active, but we want you to be prepared. So hydrate, follow those other precautions, time of day, wear the right kind of clothes, try to acclimate, take breaks, and notice those signs and symptoms so we don't get to the point Scott's talking about of severe heat stroke. It's not worth that But stay active and stay healthy. We appreciate our panel, and we'll talk to you next time.